Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Roger. In the video today, I'm going to be looking at the different types of user interfaces. And guess what? Yes, I'm going to be talking about the traditional ones, the ones that we're all accustomed to. But there are also some that generally are not dealt with that I have looked at in this video here. So please, I hope that you watch through until the end, and I'm also going to invite you to become a subscriber if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel. If you've been watching my videos, been getting value from them, please, I'd really appreciate you becoming a subscriber. Alright, let's jump right into the video. Let's begin by looking at what a user interface is. Nowadays, we have these different devices that we interact with, that we use. We have, typically your smartphone, laptop, tablet, these devices. But there are also those IoT devices. IoT stands for Internet of Things. These now would constitute things like robots, smart cars, smart TV, smart refrigerator, the voice activated devices. All of these would fall into IoT. There are different ways that we can interact with these things. Notice that there are different ways to get data into these devices and also to get responses from them. Now, the means by which they are the form in which these devices are presented to us to allow us to interact with them, that now is what is referred to as the interface, right? That's the user interface. So, yes, it is the means by which a user interacts with a device. And notice that, for instance, if you look at a desktop computer, you would interact with a desktop computer differently from how you would interact with, let us say, a smart TV, or let us say a voice activated system. A typical user interface will include things like menus, a screen, icons, buttons, virtual keyboard, and toggles. Now, there are different types of user interface. Of course, this video here, I'm going to be looking at software interface, but there are also hardware interfaces. So hardware interface would include things like sensors, touch screen, keyboard. Those would constitute a hardware interface. Yes, there are different types of software interfaces, and we're going to be looking at them here now individually. The first one is the menu-driven user interface. And guess what? As the name suggests, this is an interface which presents the user with a menu or menus. These interfaces, yes, they typically comprise of a screen and menus from which the user makes choices. These now, when we look at the menu-driven user interface, typically things like our smart TV would have that. Smartphones. What about the ABM? So you go to the ABM to do some banking transaction. That's the same thing as ATM. To do a banking transaction, what do you see there on the screen? Menus. And we navigate to the task, to the activity that we want to do via the menus. Also, if you look at you have a service provider. It may be your ISP, your internet service provider, or it may be your electricity service provider, whomever it is. You call a company, and you are presented with an automated telephone directory. Yes, and to navigate to this section of the system to get the help that you want, you actually have to navigate through a menu. All right, so those are examples there of how they fit in. Now, in terms of the pros and cons of a menu-driven user interface, there are step-by-step options, and it has to be in a logical order, of course. They're relatively easy to use, typically user-friendly too, and they require less resources than, let us say, a graphical user interface. And because of that too, you find that there is less stress on the hardware stress. So the system requirements for a device that is running exclusively a menu-driven user interface, it would require less memory and less processing power. than let us say one that is, primarily graphical, a GUI, a graphical user interface system. And of course, they support multiple languages. So you go to even the ABM, some ABMs, based on where they are placed, and you'll find that the menu option gives you the choice to choose a different language. This is a good thing about it. Now, in terms of the cons, the system does not immediately take the user to the exact location. Of course, you have to navigate through a maze of other options before you get to what you actually want. And too many menus can cause confusion. It is more time consuming, of course, and the user will have to remember commands. So for instance, if you're using this one, for instance, if you call a company and you're presented with an automated phone directory, you have to remember the number associated with the particular department that you want when it presents you with that spot when you actually make the choice. This type of interface also restricts the device activity, so you're typically limited to what you're able to do on such a device. And of course, I mentioned this already, that the response time is slower than, let us say, a command line interface system. Now, on the heels of that, we're looking at the command line user interface, and for some persons this may perhaps be the most unpleasant one of them, but I should say that it has its place. But before I get into that, let me just give you some, the lowdown on what it is. So it is a text-based user interface, and this type of interface is primarily used to manage files. The command line user interface, and of course it is referred to as CLI for short, it allows the user to interact with the device only by typing commands. An example of this now is the disk operating system. Now, I mentioned before that this, for some persons, would be, would fall into the lowest spot, or it would be at the lowest rung of the ladder, so to speak. Where the pros and cons are concerned, it's very fast because there is no GUI, there's no menu. It is down to the level, it is almost at the level of machine language, right? And notice I said almost, it is not there. Okay, so because of that, you find that it's very fast, and it is also very memory and CPU processor resource efficient, and of course it requires far less resolution for your monitor or for your graphics card. Where the cons are concerned, it's very much specialized, which means that this type of interface is one best suited for those persons who are experienced in using such an interface. So you find that programmers would typically use this interface. Also, persons who are network technicians, network engineers, they would use that. Also, the users have to remember the commands, and there can be quite a lot of them. And they are error prone here, meaning that you have to remember the specific commands. If you don't remember the command, you will not be able to execute the task you're hoping to execute. And this interface is also limited to a keyboard. That is the use of a keyboard. Now, the graphical user interface, GUI, and I'm sure that we are all experienced in using this interface. The graphical user interface, GUI for short, was first developed by Xerox, and it is one that uses interactive visual indicators. So it includes a number of things, so it is multifaceted. So you have things like windows, menus, buttons, icons, tabs, toolbars, dialog bars, ribbons. Typically you will have a mouse pointer also, which the user uses to interact with the device on which it is. It is also referred to as a WIMP interface, and that acronym stands for Windows, Icons, Menus, and Pointer, because this type of interface typically includes these components. Examples of a GUI would be that of your desktop operating system. So your Windows operating system, or your Mac operating system, your iOS operating system, your Android operating system would all be examples of a GUI. Also, the different apps that we use on these devices would also be an example of a GUI. Now, in terms of pros and cons, they're user friendly. Yes, very much so. Simple and easy to use. They're very common. The graphical user interface does not require any specialized knowledge as you would find with, let us say, an operating system or some application which is some interface that is command line driven. The responses are visually communicated, so you typically will have instant feedback, and it supports multitasking. Now, in terms of cons, yes, they are very much memory and processor intensive. You can't get away from that. And especially the Windows operating system, they are often described, and especially the later versions, they are very much described as being resource hogs because they just consume so much resources. As a matter of fact, where this is concerned, whenever Microsoft puts out a new operating system, typically it requires some significant hardware upgrade. This now is the difference between them and, let us say, a Mac, the Mac operating systems, which based on the architecture, they run differently. They do not use up so much resources as the Windows operating systems do. Yeah, so the response time of a graphical user interface may be slower. Well, not maybe, it will be slower than that of a command line interface. And it requires more hardware support, I just mentioned that already, and greater system design. Now, we're at form-based user interface, and this interface, it has a form-like structure, so that is what you're presented with. Typically, this type of user interface is used for data capture. This is typically linked to a database. So there are typically text boxes or text boxes, check boxes, radar boxes, buttons that are presented to the user to enable the user to make the various inputs. In terms of the pros and cons, yes, they're easy to use. They typically require limited training. In terms of the cons, interaction would be quite slow because it is restricted to or limited based on the extent to which the typing skills of the user. There's also less appeal than a GUI and a menu-driven interface, and definitely there are very limited options available. Now we're at natural language user interface, and a lot of persons should be familiar with this one. With this interface, the user inputs or interacts with the device by speaking. So it is through speech, and this is what is referred to as natural language. So you are articulating whatever it is that you want to do to the device by just speaking to it. It will incorporate a microphone and speaker, so the input would be via the microphone, and the feedback would be through the speaker. Speech, yes, I mentioned that already. Typically, the user responds to questions, and the system is typically based on AI, that's artificial intelligence, ML, that's machine language, and NLP, which is natural language processing. These systems, some typical examples of a natural language user interface would be Google Assistant, Cortana, and Apple's Siri. In terms of pros and cons, they may require no or very limited training. Also, they are well suited for those persons who may be physically challenged. So there are persons who may have some challenge which prevents them from being able to use their hands or fingers. So this will come in, quite handy in such a situation. They can be fast. They can be faster than in terms of the interaction time than, let us say, a menu-driven interface. Now, in terms of the cons, this is where things gets a little bit rough, because typically natural language user interface requires very precise language. You'll find too that there may often be a high degree of misinterpretation, because and typically too, let me just say too before I even get into that typically the user will have to train the system to recognize speech patterns. Another limitation is that this certainly would not be practical for those persons who have some hearing or speech impediment. Typically also, they are very technical to program, and yes, I'd mentioned this already, that the system needs training. The different types of user interfaces are a representation of our technological evolution. We continue to evolve technologically. Where the user interfaces are concerned, life would have essentially started off with the command line interface, would have gone up to menu driven, then to the graphical user interface, to where we are now, which is using natural languages. So it shows that we continue to morph as we progress through time. Where natural language is concerned, it is a natural part of our everyday life. So nowadays you can even do a Google search without even have to type anything using your Google Assistant. We also have devices such as Amazon's Echo and Google Nest, which helps to build the capacity where smart homes are concerned. These systems help us to be able to interact in real time with the internet and other IoT systems to get things like weather updates, traffic updates, and so forth. So it is really a significant part of our lives now going into the future. That's natural language user interface. All right, so that concludes my presentation, and again, my name is Roger. Please remember to like, share, and to subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet done so. See you again in the next video. Take care.